Hi, my name is Kaya Dale, and my project's on the impact of climate change on coastal cities. Coastal cities are the first areas around that will be affected by climate change, and we have to worry about what happens to them because their outcome will show how we will fare against climate change. In my project, I focused on Europe, where 1/3 of the population lives off the coast, which honestly is a huge percentage. And even their coastal cities are feeling huge effects, such as Rotterdam and Venice. Venice has recently been flooded over the past few weeks by 3 different floods that all total to about 6 feet. These floods have been the highest they have been in 53 years in the country. Venice is a good example of the effects of climate change on a city because the government doesn't try to prevent the effects. And even though the city is surrounded by water and it's the whole draw to tourists, they haven't tried to change. With these factors, you would feel like the government should be very adamant about implementing flood barriers, but they have yet to finish a project. And because of that, it has cost them millions of euros from the flood. Another example of a European city affected by climate change is Rotterdam, but Rotterdam has reached a different fate. This map shows the amount of Rotterdam which is under sea level. It is estimated that about 90% of Rotterdam is under the sea level. And since it is a port city off the coast, it would seem doomed to be flooded all the time. Except the city government is very adamant about creating ways to prevent flooding after a huge flood in 1953, where they knew they would have to change if they didn't want their city in grave danger. Now, Rotterdam has a 1 in 10,000 year ratio in the methods that they use to prevent flooding. The different methods they use are shoring up their coasts and using man-made barriers to both keep their ports running and preventing flooding from happening. These two cities with similar makeups have gone into 2 different directions because of the work put in by the government and the communities around them. They both have had huge floods around 50 years ago, but the government of Rotterdam acted while the Venetian government stayed quiet. In Rotterdam, the government knew that their city was very fragile to floods, and so they decided to change, and with the help of the community surrounding it, was able to create one of the most successful flood prevention methods for a city, and has even created water parks that double as water barriers. They knew that they couldn't just ignore it, especially with climate change on the rise and affecting their city. But the Venetian government turned a blind eye. Their government didn't really care to help. They knew that they needed to put in more work for their city, but they didn't because they wanted to save money. And although they did put in some effort to create flood barriers, it is seen by many as ineffective, too late, and didn't even help prevent the flooding. And this has not only caused grave effects to the Venetian government, but has been very bad for the everyday community of Venice. Although none of us have lived here or even been here, it is to either cities, we have to keep these 2 examples in mind when we think of what to do and what not to do. In the end, do we want our world to turn into a Venice or do we want it to turn into a Rotterdam? The government has a huge responsibility in implementing change, but it's also up to us to be active groups of citizens. We have to write to the government and help implement change or even recognize our effects on the climate change. But there does have to be a huge change in the environmental movement in order to cause our world to turn into a Rotterdam and not a Venice. Thank you.